Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so pleased to have you listening this episode of RHE Podcast. I'm here with Sid, and Sid, can you tell me where you're calling out of?
I'm calling from British Columbia, Canada.
British Columbia. And Thad, where are you calling out of?
Bowling Green, Kentucky.
Yeah. So how is the maple syrup over there? Is it pretty good? Does it get better? Like is it like a regional thing?
Wrong end of the country. That's all back in Eastern Canada. We don't not out west here. We're like Eastern Washington. It's all dry in Ponderosa Pines where I live. So,
like what is there around? What's regionally around there?
Yeah, we're kind of considered, I guess, the Napa Valley of the North. We got a lot of orchards and wineries. Tends to be a semi-arid area, so it's good for grape growing. So, yeah, nice lakes. Nice hunting if you're into deer hunting and stuff like that. And yeah, it's nice. And we're not too far from Vancouver or Seattle if you want to go catch a ball game or something. So not too bad.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
You do much hunting?
No, not me. Not me. When I was a kid, I did lots in central Canada and Saskatchewan, but no, I'm getting too long in a tooth to be tracking deer through the bush. So no.
What about you, Dad?
No, I'm not much of a hunter. A lot in Kentucky, though. We definitely have our fair share of hunters here, but I'm not one of them.
So this last year, I did fishing for the first time, and I always thought fishing was one of the most absurd things for guys to do. I just could not see why guys would do that. But amazingly, we moved down kind of out to the countryside, and there's a lot of lakes and islands around here. So I got into it. And oh my God, is that a good way to spend a few hours? And surprisingly, that is the one place I can go where I can tell my wife, hey, I'm going fishing, and she will not message me. She doesn't want to know anything else. Like, okay, you want to go fishing? Go fishing. And she understands that little, it definitely is relaxing. It definitely is a peaceful experience. I feel a lot better after, even if I don't catch anything, just being out there. It gives me kind of, you get occupied with it, right?
Yep. Now, did you go with a friend?
With my cousin, yeah. My cousin lives here.
Tends to be the thing that we like the most is the conversation. For me, the rare time I go fishing, it's because of the people I'm with, not the fishing per se, but it's enjoying that time out on the lake and good time with folks.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Sid?
Not too much. I used to, when I lived on the west coast, BC, right on the ocean, we used to go salmon fishing a lot. But in the interior here, yeah, the odd time I'll go, but I don't like, usually in Canada you do a lot of fishing in the wintertime, ice fishing, but I'm not too much of a fan of cold, so I try to do my fishing in the summer when there's open water. But I got cousins that ice fish all winter. They show pictures and they get big northern pike, and yeah, fishing's fun. Like Thad was saying, though, it's more who you go with it rather than what you're doing, so just gives you some quiet time to chat about stuff you might necessarily never get to chat about. So yeah,
have a few beers. So okay, so I want to ask you a few questions here before we get started, Sid, because as you know, Sid, you're kind of outnumbered here. Normally what we do is have an atheist co-host, and so normally we're interviewing other atheists or agnostics. So normally the ratio is like in their favor, but now the scale has tightly been tipped. So
I was gonna say, no problem. Canadians are used to being outnumbered. So.
Oh yeah, and we're Americans, so you're like.
Oh, I know. No, that's what I meant. Yeah.
You are doubly God. No, but actually, I just had a podcast with Dad, myself, and we are, at least I'm probably more liberal than he is, and on the political spectrum. So I'm sure if we get into politics, it's going to be me and you versus him. But as I said, we're not. We want to have a nice, respectful, and joyful conversation. So we want to just break a little bit of ice here. Sure. If you don't mind. And so we're going to start off by, I want you to tell me your favorite sports team and your favorite sport.
So yeah, obviously as a Canadian, it's going to have to be hockey.
Hockey.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I cheer for the Canucks, which to put it into an American football expression, that would be like cheering for the Cleveland Browns. Yeah. So.
The Canucks?
Vancouver Canucks. Sorry, that's the Vancouver team, West Coast here. So.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they've been in the league. They've been in the league since '71, same time as the St. Louis Blues, and Vancouver's never won the Stanley Cup. So.
I see.
Yeah. So they've gone as dry. I've been as alive as long as they haven't won. So yeah, that's a long run. Yeah.
So what about you, Dad? I think you're saying you like football.
Yeah, college basketball, Kentucky, of course, University of Kentucky,
Nice.
and Western Kentucky, but UK gets the national attention. They're fun to follow in that sense. Professional football, I like the Washington football team. Joe Gibbs was the coach back in the 80s when I first started watching football, and they were a lot of fun then. And since like 90 or 91, they've been, they've not been great to watch, but there is something, like Sid knows, there's something about rooting for a team. There's no bandwagoners on your team. There's just people that actually care about the sport and the team, because nobody else is rooting for them.
You said hockey. That's a given. It could be curling, right? You guys are also really into curling.
Yeah. Lots of people are, but curling, you don't have teams. The curling championships are all province based.
I see.
So it'd be like if Kentucky had a curling team, it wouldn't be from a university. It'd be just guys from the state, and then Kentucky would make it into the curling championship. So you'd cheer for Kentucky. You wouldn't cheer for, if you're from Kentucky, you wouldn't be cheering for Oregon. So yeah.
I got a little quick, amazing story to tell you. I was actually divorced from my wife for 5 years, and in that time, I found Jesus Christ, and I wanted coming back to South Korea and reuniting with her. And the first night I got back, she got pregnant, right? Then my daughter was born right in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. So it was amazing going down there and getting to see all the cooperation. But if you watched, I think the South Korean, they was the biggest deal for them, because I guess it's not that big of a sport here. But there's this girls team. They wind up winning, I think, silver. But it was like really. Did you happen to see that?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to remember that vaguely. Yeah, usually host countries. It's funny, host countries in the Olympics, they may not be very good in the sport, but for some reason, if they get that teams, I remember, as an analogy to, I remember when Korea got the World Cup, and the South Korean men's team did phenomenally better than they, quote, should have done.
Right.
But there's something about being a home, in your home country, and you're representing your country in front of your countrymen. Absolutely. That you kind of pick up your game a little bit. It seems like, anyway.
So if you got stuck on a deserted island, and you could only have one action star with you from any fictional movie, who would you depend on to get you off of that island?
That's a different question. I would probably pick Dolph Lundgren, just because.
Nice.
Now there's two reasons for that. One, because he does make a good action star.
He's a physicist,
and he was from MIT. The guy's a brilliant person. So you get kind of a double whammy there. You get the brawn to maybe figure out some stuff and take care of some business, and then you get the brains that, hey, how do we get off this island? So yeah, I'd pick Dolph if I had to pick somebody.
That is absolutely brilliant. I asked my atheist co-host that, and he said he would choose Tom Hanks from Castaway.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
Tony Stark.
We
get Tony Stark for sure.
Just fly you off of it.
Put some coconuts together and build a jetpack out of it. We'd be all right.
Exactly.
No, that's a good answer.
Last question. What are your top 3 UK bands of all time? Top 3.
Oh, UK bands. Led Zeppelin's got to be number 1.
Zeppelin. Can't go wrong with them.
Yeah, Pink Floyd's got to be number 2. Number 3, UK bands. Probably gonna age myself with this one, but I guess Pet Shop Boys.
All right.
Yeah.
And what about you, Dad?
Wow, I did not listen to a lot of secular music growing up. The Beatles are who came to my mind first.
Beatles.
Yeah. Still enjoy some of their stuff. But where's you two from? They're
Ireland,
not,
but
Ireland.
So we'll go for the UK. That count.
Yeah, I'll stick with those two. I could listen to those two and be very happy.
So I got really into the 80s in the 2000s, because I was born in 82, but and I think in 2001 I got like superly obsessed with the 80s. But so Duran's going to be my all-time favorite, but definitely number 2 is the Smiths, and then probably Led Zeppelin. I'd say Led Zeppelin's a great choice. Can't really go wrong with them. So anyway, Sid, getting into the topic of this conversation, as you know, both Ad and I are Christian, but can you tell us where you are on the docking scale from the 1 to 7? I actually just recently discovered what that is. So could you place yourself on there, please?
The scale goes from 7 being a firm believer or an absolute
No.
believer to
Atheist.
is it the opposite?
Yeah, opposite.
It's the opposite. Okay, so yeah, I'm not a fan of the docking scale, but I guess if I had to put myself on it, I'd say a 5 or a 6. You know, I can't say with certainty. I don't know anybody that ever could say with 100% certainty something doesn't exist, but all the versions of God that have been presented to me, they usually fall in that 5-6 range. I don't find any particular presentation of it any more convincing than any of the others.
Okay, so Docking himself even said he was like a 6.8 because he's like, well, if you're being objective about this, there's no really way you could roll it out. But he's like, interesting. Another one of the atheist hosts that we're using right now, we have a few of them, but he said something very similar. He something very interesting. He says, depending on what iteration of God that you're presenting, like that varies. He's like, if you're talking about something generally speaking, some kind of creator deity that might be out there, he's like, then I'm probably like a 1. But he goes, if you're talking about a Christian God, I'm probably like at a 7. It's interesting. I always thought that there was just like, okay, you're a Christian or you're an atheist. Like there's just this black and white. But there's, first of all, as the docking scale, there's a wide range, 1. And then 2, there's actually a range of whether or not people want to believe in God. Because some atheists will tell you, I wish that God exists. And then some atheists will be like Christopher Hitchens and say, thank God that there's no God. Thank God that there's not a heaven. So where would you put yourself in that sense? Like, are you grateful that you don't believe in God, or would it be something you want to believe? Or
I can see why certain, or well, not certain people. I can probably see why most believers are happy to believe. I know my grandmother was a great believer. For me, it hasn't really. Yeah, that's kind of a weird question because it hasn't really come up in a sense that I feel like I've missed out because I lack a belief in something. That'd be like if you asked me, do you think Hindus are happy being Hindus? And I would imagine they would be. But if you ask me, well, how do you feel not being a Hindu? I have no experience of being that, like being a Hindu that believes in that faith. So it's hard for me to quantify how that would be a missing part. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. As far as if you just to step back and when you were talking about like probability or trying to find where Hawkins says he's a 7 or 6 point whatever on a scale. Yeah. I mean, and you said your previous one of your previous guests had mentioned something like that. Well, I mean, there is obviously some things are more improbable than others. So, like for instance, if I say, let's give Christianity a probability of pick a number like an X. It's an X. Okay, a probability of being true, then I would say something like Mormonism is statistically less probable than Christianity. No, and that's nothing against Mormons. It isn't, but it's just that it's Christianity plus you've added something. So if you start adding along the line, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but in my opinion, you're decreasing the probability that now you're finding something true. But
actually, the guy who I was telling you about, he actually is a former Mormon. So we have gotten to talk about the Mormon faith quite a bit. The only reason I picked Mormonism, it was just an example. I mean, I have nothing particularly against Mormonism as a general doctrine. So the context I was explaining, this is kind of ironic, was that I was explaining because the topic was the problem of evil, and I said I said, actually, the Mormons could actually solve the problem of evil much easier than just your average Christian could, because according to their doctrine, we were all born in heaven as spirit beings, and then we came down to the earth to try to become gods ourselves. So this whole process of having to endure suffering and pain and all that, it's a necessary stepping stone for us to be a god. And he was like, oh, I was a former Mormon, so we got to talk about that. But anyway, that being said, that was there ever a period, either one where you didn't believe in God, or you kind of like step away from the faith, or have you ever had like a really serious crisis of faith that's caused you to not believe, or maybe, or what? Can you just?
Yeah, actually, very much so. And getting to the how much do we believe, it could even tie into that. They have so I was a sophomore in high school when I became a Christian. I also started working on a computer for the first time in 1982 and 81, 82. And those two trains of thought are very different.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to talk about right brain and left brain, you can, but whatever it is, when you're working on a computer, you're trying to understand how it works, and an engineering, scientific STEM
Mm-hmm.
perspective. And even though I was learning things of spirit and studying and growing as a Christian, my Christianity had nothing to do with understanding how to program a computer and how a computer works. Right? There's no such thing as Christian math. There's just math. I loved both of those fields and studied both those fields, but it was always interesting to me that my STEM friends didn't have the conversations about things of spirit, and my Christian friends didn't seem to appreciate the way the natural world actually works, and the benefits of understanding that. And I always thought that, if they could just get together and talk, they'd realize, go fishing or something, they'd realize they actually like each other.
Mm-hmm.
But I always assumed that I'd be able to just resolve those two, right? That there'd be a combination of gravity and quantum, right? That there'd be a string theory of faith and science that would pull them all together. And as I got older, they just didn't come together. They're just different purposes, right? Understanding how the world works, the natural world works. That helps us, live better and not be afraid of, to have our fears be rational fears and not irrational fears. It helps us literally live longer. We have medicine that works and planes that fly, right? But the things of spirit is what helps us live better, right? It adds life to our days, and science adds days to our life. At least that's where I came on this, and just to recognize that I just have to know what perspective I'm using on the context. I would actually be bothered by if I was hiring somebody to do a big civil construction project and moving a mountain was part of that project. I wouldn't have any problem hiring a Christian who was an engineer, but I would be very bothered if part of that schedule plan for moving that mountain, if he, put into the plan or even considered it an option that he would tell the mountain to jump into the sea, right? To even though that's a verse of scripture, and as a Christian, I can recognize that, but I would have no confidence in an engineer who did that. I would have no confidence in a medical doctor who might even believe that spit and dirt can heal blindness. I would have no confidence in a medical doctor who considered that as a medical recommendation. It's a disrespect for the study of the discipline to to force God into something that's not his role. So for me, where am I on God just never comes up when I'm programming a computer. God never comes up when I'm doing calculus. God never comes up when I'm doing STEM stuff. But as a human being, I think that we are more than just machines. I think that we are more than just mammals. I think there is something of value and purpose in community and connection and the things we call, and we can call it human spirit if that is less loaded of a term, but there's something about that time when you're sitting down having dinner with somebody, and it's just, we even use poetic words, not scientific words. It was divine. It was powerful. It was moving, and the scientific mind is not necessarily the best mind to understand that. Well, what was it? Was it the seasoning of the steak? Was it the temperature of the room? What made it divine? It's like, it was a spirit thing, a human spirit connection thing. And so that balance is what I'm really interested in. And at one point, yes, when I was told you either have to believe the mountain will move when you say throw it into the sea, or, you're out of the faith. At that point, it's like, well, if you're telling me I don't have the choice but to believe this literally or I'm out of the faith, then I'm out. And I stepped away. But when I was away, it's like, I'm missing a lot, right? I know that there's things of human spirit, things that I did in my community and my faith tradition, and the connections that has through thousands of years, and the great history behind it. And I know there's a place for balance. And so I came back, and I think my understanding of Christianity has been much stronger.
Interesting.
Having taken some time away from it.
I would agree with a lot of that. There's, I think having a faith and a community that's based around, there's some very important things. I mean, but I think community is important for everyone, regardless. Like I would, in our town here, we have quite a big Sikh population from India, and they have a big temple just around the corner from us. And and I have a friend that he's not from this community, but I work with him up in northern Alberta, and he's a Sikh. And for him, like we chat a bit, and I asked him about his faith and stuff. And he said, it's funny with the Sikhs is that there's cultural Sikhs and then there's religious Sikhs. So he said growing up when he was young, he was definitely, his family, they were big cultural Sikhs. Like they went to all the ceremonies. He wore the turban. I mean, his dad grew the beard out, like all the long hair, all the traditions of that community. And it was only later when he became a young adult that he actually delved into the religious aspect of the faith. So he was more cultural than he was religious at the beginning. But I mean, I understand what Thad's talking about when he says, there's always something transcendent. And I don't know if that, again, loaded words and all, but there's definitely something transcendent with moments in our lives when we get together. Like one example is, like you said, you get together with some friends over a nice meal, and it was just something about that evening that you could eat 1,000 dinners and remember 3 of them, and the 3 that you remember is because that was such a great evening. And like you say, was it the steak spice? Was it the only thing I might disagree a bit with that on is that, like, and I kind of want to use the example of the painting behind you, Thad, if I could. I mean, you can look at that painting behind you and you can say, well, you know what, I understand it's made up of chemical components that make up the certain pigments in the paint, and you can understand all the details of that picture, for lack of a better term, scientifically, but that still doesn't take away the beauty of the art. I can look at that picture and say, yeah, I could know all that stuff about it, but I can still look at that and say, that's a nice landscape scene. It's a nice, beautiful house. There's green trees in the background. I like the color of the sky. Kind of speaks to me. Yeah, I think transcendent. You're right. We are not machines in a sense that we're like salamanders or cockroaches. I mean, there's more to our experience than biological chemical reactions. I know that. I know that's true. I mean, there's nothing in evolutionary theory that would say, why should I myself appreciate poetry? Like, I'm a huge poet nut. You guys may not have ever maybe heard of him or not, but Leonard Cohen was a singer-songwriter from Canada.
Come on.
And I personally think he rivals Dylan as far as his capability of putting pen to paper for songs. And he had tons of songs that I just, to this day, I still totally appreciate, because just the craftsmanship that went into the thought process of how do I get, and the feelings those lines and those songs give you. You're right. There's no biological explanation why, I would appreciate that as much as I do.
I'm not sure if he actually wrote Hallelujah. No, I guess he did.
Yes, he did. No, he did.
He did. Okay.
He wrote that song. Yep.
That song is amazing. That's one of the, I think, all-time classics. So I have a question for you. And I want to preface this by telling you how this podcast got started, because I want to say about maybe around 4 years ago, there was this organization called Ask, which is the Atheist Society of Kern, which is where I live, Kern County. And so they get together and they talk about how much they dislike things that Christians do, you know. And I joined their Facebook group, and I was looking at some of the stuff that they were saying, and there was this one guy particularly I was looking forward to debating. Some of the stuff I thought he said about Christianity was a little rude. And so they had this meeting, and they like to have him at pizza parlors. And so we went there, and I scope him out. I see him, and he's there with his wife, actually, and his daughter. And we sat down and had some pizza and had a few pitchers of beer. And I'm like, I really like this guy. Like, I really, really like this guy. We have a lot in common. I can't eat. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even think the concept of God even came up, because we were talking mostly about our backgrounds. And he was telling me his background story about how his parents got divorced, and then he went and lived with another parent. They got a divorce, and then he wound up living with the other spouse. So he's like, he wasn't even living with his parents. And I felt so much empathy and pain, his pain so much. I didn't care to debate him at that point. I just wanted to talk to him. And we were like, why don't we start this podcast where we just present different ideas and have total respect along the way? So prefacing this question, that's my own background, but I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, do you have any Christian friends? And two, how can people be friends who have a difference of opinions on issues such as this? What's your opinion on that?
I'm sorry, is that to Thad or to me?
To you. I don't really care.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Just here for moral support.
No, I have not only have I have religious friends. Like I say, the fellow at work I work with is a Sikh. He's not a Christian. I have Christian friends. I have Christian family members. Mm-hmm. Typically, that issue doesn't come up as far as, when you're talking, and I find this in a general sense in the community or amongst people, you meet, the issues of religion never really come up unless you're discussing something specific as a topic. Mm-hmm. So if something comes up like gay marriage as a topic of discussion, you might find then that you'll see some divisions among people of particular faith or people that aren't of faith or something. Ironically, a lot of times politics don't, because my politics for Canada anyway, and I understand Canada is different than the US, but my politics run a little more to the right than the typical atheists do. And I tend to get into some arguments online but again, take it to context that a conservative in Canada is not
right
is not as right as a conservative. Like if my guess would be is if I lived in the US, I'd probably vote Democratic. Because our conservative party would probably be the equivalent of the Democratic Party, and all our other parties are to the left of that. So just take that into consideration. But for lots of social issues and monetary issues, I tend to run a little more right of center than a lot of people I know that seem to be atheists. But no, in general discussions on, I'm a big fan of discussing ideas. And if religion's one of those ideas we talk about, that's great, but typically that doesn't come up. But it is funny when you mention when you meet somebody online and they seem a certain way, and then when you meet them in person, it's different. It's usually that way. I mean, there's something about having that, if you're on Facebook or something where you're not, I mean, you can be freer and less accountable. You would say you might type something to somebody on Facebook that if you said it to their face, you might feel a little bit like, geez, I shouldn't have said that. That's a little rude. You can be a little more abrupt. But the other thing I like about Facebook and discussions is that because it's the one advantage Facebook has, somebody can't overtalk you or you can't overtalk them sometimes. They type something, you read it, you think about it, you type your response or your reply. They read it, they think about it, and so on. So, I mean, yes, there can be a lot of rude jerks out there on Facebook and they're just out to cause trouble. But in some senses, I like it because it does give that space to listen or read and respond.
Actually, this is pretty much the main reason why I wanted to talk to you today. So this has just been foundation work so far, Sid, because I do want to ask you some questions. I did send you a screenshot of another video we did with a guy about bullying, because I did meet him in an atheist group, and I was just trying to get people to come on here just to talk, you know what I mean? And I did wind up getting cursed out and called some names and called an idiot and stuff like that. But I do want to ask you some questions, because I did post a few things, and I do want to give you a couple of them and get your feedback from them.
Sure.
But one of them says, okay, so one is to welcome the agreement. And I think having difference of opinions, because I'm sure if we started talking about politics, it's going to be like a Mexican standoff. I think I'm the only Mexican here, because we got two other white guys and a Mexican, but we're gonna literally be, it's gonna change on the issue. So I think when we welcome the agreement and say, I appreciate having the other person's perspective. Okay, so one, be thankful to the person, but one I think is so important is to distrust your first instinctive impression, and not to get defensive, because a lot of times our first impression and our first reaction can be wrong. And I think a lot of people thought that about me, like, hey, I'm just here to debate. So they try to debate me, or I'm here to tell people that they're all going to hell. And I'm like, I just want to have conversations. Like, I'm not trying to debate you. I'm trying to find where we can find common ground. So what do you think about those two? And how do you think people can use those online?
Well, you're right. People, in general, people tend to get a little defensive. And a good analogy to that is job interviews, or job evaluations, like employee evaluations. Okay. I've had to do a number of those in my career. And if you start handing out a little bit of criticism, you can physically see somebody getting their back up. If you don't do it in the proper, well, even if you do it in the proper way. Because like you say, that initial reaction is a defensive reaction, like, oh no, I'm not. Well, no, I don't do that, or
absolutely.
But my preference is that I like arguing and I like being challenged, because I think I need my ideas challenged. If you never have your idea, like if you just talk to people that have your view or your ideas, how do you ever get your ideas challenged? Like that, in a sense, not that I like having conversations with my friends, because we all grew up together and we kind of share background and stuff. But a lot of conversations I have online with people that are argue vehemently with me, I value those arguments, because I could be wrong about a number of things, and I have been wrong about a number of things, and that's not a good way to go through life, just thinking, oh yeah, I know everything and I'm perfect, and get your back up when somebody points something out to you. Now, having, like you said, though, there is sometimes that first impression of someone where you kind of read something or you look at something and you're thinking, well, this guy's a bozo. Well, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I mean, but that's a little harder to overcome, because that is a pretty basic human. We're quick, I think, just because of our evolutionary background, we're pretty quick on making snap judgments. Yeah. Because at one point in time we had to. Is this tribe coming over the hill friendly or not friendly? Well, you only have so many seconds to figure that out, and it's a complex social thing that you're looking at to do that. So, but having said that, I mean, there's lots of things we have innate in us that we can overcome. So that's going to be one of them. But no, I don't mind arguing. I don't mind people pointing out things to me that they think I might be wrong about, and maybe after a while I'll think I'm wrong about it too. I kind of like that, because I want to know if I'm wrong.
Well, let me tell you something. You're an incredibly level-headed person, and the few interactions I've had with you, I'm very grateful that you've chosen to come on here and to voice yourself. So that being said, I want to ask that a question now, because the last one of these, and I'm going to post these and make these available in this description, but it has to do with what you just said right now. But it says, ask, could my opponent be right, partially right, or is there any merit to their position? Theodore Roosevelt said that if he was right 75% of the time, he would reach his highest level of expectations. He also goes on to say on here that if you can be right 55% of the time on Wall Street, you can make $1 million a day. So what are your thoughts on that one, Dad? And or anything that Sid had to say?
If you can be right 30% of the time, you can make even more money in baseball. I mean, it's a if you hit 300, you're
oh, that's a
very,
good
very
point.
rich.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
For me, the telling thing is, Sid, I've talked with this to Isaiah a little bit. I haven't with you. There's a huge difference between a person who's in fight or flight mode and a person who's in rest and digest mode. You're physically different. You think different. You behave different. If a person, it comes over the hill, right? That blink reaction, and they're giving the signals that they're in fight or flight mode, that's going to put me off regardless of their skin color, the sports team jersey they're wearing, whatever it is. That's because I am not looking for a fight, right? And a person in fight or flight mode is looking for a fight. So I'm in the business of de-escalating. I think that we learn better in rest and digest mode. We survive better in fight or flight, but we learn better in rest and digest. So my first thing is to try to get people out of that. And everything, when we talk about politics and talk about religion, Christianity is very different in fight or flight mode. And when I came back to Christianity, I did not come back to fight or flight Christianity. I came back to rest and digest Christianity. My politics is not fight or flight, and I don't participate in fight or flight politics. But the problem in politics isn't left versus right; it's the extreme left versus the extreme right. Or in fact, it's the extremes versus the moderates. I mean, and the extreme left needs the extreme right, and the extreme right needs the extreme left to create fear and outrage. And those of us in the middle just kind of are like, is there not a single intelligent person that has, in a position of elected? Is it just people that are outraged all the time? So I'm frustrated when I see politicians or religious people that are themselves fear and outrage and who are promoting fear and outrage. I think that's when I think of God and spirit, I do not think of it's a God that's for us, not against us. It's not something that's that should be fearful of it. And and if you want to talk about just powerful community and not have the word God in it, then that's fine too. But I think that if Christians could enter the conversation without making other people feeling afraid and put off, I think that there is value in the wisdom of the 2,000 years, 4,000 years roots, the stories that get passed on from generation to generation about the human experience. And we can read stories of the prodigal son and that dynamic there, and it can relate to us and to our marriages and our families and our friendships, and we can learn from those. But there's people that go through that same process, and Bob Dylan's the equivalent of those story truths. But I like the history of it when it's done in a non-fear based way. And Christians have taken ourselves out of the conversation, right? Like I say, the Christian who prays a mountain, you take yourself out of the conversation in engineering. You're not taken seriously, and you shouldn't be taken seriously. So if the people who are doing the engineering, if those of us that have an equal balance of things of spirit and the history of human expression and understanding that and trying to explore that and really value it, if we eliminate ourselves from the conversation, I don't see the value of that.
That's a good point. Sid, I have another question I want to ask you. Really, thank you for that. I feel like this is like we got a trinity of reason going on here. It's like the whole trinity. This is great. This is great. I'm really digging this. Listen first. Give your opponents a chance to talk. Let them finish. Try to build bridges of understanding. Don't build higher barriers of misunderstanding. Look for areas of agreement, dwell on the points of in areas that you agree on first. So get your feedbacks on that, Sid.
I mean, I find a good way, well, sometimes this is a double-edged sword, and it goes back to what Thad was talking about, what kind of position your discussion partners in is. Questions can be open-ended questions can be a good way to build bridges. However, questions can also put somebody that's defensive more defensive. It depends how you word them. But if I find I'm with discussing something with somebody, and I think they're off the tracks somehow, I could be wrong, but I'm thinking they're going somewhere that, either I think they don't know what they're talking about, or I don't know what they're talking about. They could be talking about something perfectly sensible, and I'm just totally out of my element. I just find asking open questions is a good way to figure out, because again, not only verbal communication, but typing communication, you miss so much nuance.
Right.
You get nonverbal cues from somebody when you're talking, even with Zoom or Skype or whatever we're on here. You can pick up some visual cues from people. They're nodding their heads, or they're scratching their heads. There's the way they shift. People put themselves in defensive posture. They'll cross their arms over their chest. That you can pick up those verbal cues that you don't necessarily pick up by typing. So what I'm trying to discuss and find some middle ground and something heated and again, sometimes I like heated. I mean, there's an old saying, I forget who said it, but somebody said, only light comes from heat. So sometimes you need to argue vigorously with somebody. And I tend to learn a lot from people that I can argue vigorously. I mean, respectfully, and you're not name calling and that kind of stuff, but people that are firm on a point and they're hammering home good things to support that point. I find I can learn some stuff like that. But if you get into something where you're not getting that kind of positive outcome out of it, I just tend to step back and just start asking questions. I kind of find myself that's a bit of a bridge building exercise, because at least if you start asking some open questions, maybe whatever topic A is that you're getting all the heat and resistance from or disagreement on, maybe you can shift over by asking some questions to B, and then you can come back to A when everybody's kind of calm down and cool down a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate that last point that you said there, Sid. And I do want to phrase something and then ask Thad another question. But did either of you guys see the movie The Sixth Sense? Yeah.
Bruce Willis and the little kid. And yep.
And I See Dead People.
Yep.
I don't think anybody.
Osment.
Yeah.
I think Haley Joel Osment's the kid's name.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And Bruce Willis, and I think Donnie Wahlberg was in it as well. But anyway, so when you get to the end of that movie, and you're like, how the heck did I not notice that nobody actually ever talks with Bruce Willis? You're like, I got to go watch this thing again, right? Or Fight Club. You get to the end of Fight Club, and you're like, wow, that was kind of obvious. If you go through and watch it again, it's like they give you so many hints. Or The Prestige, the movie Prestige is one of my favorite movies. Christopher Nolan is my favorite director, but he goes out of his way, like literally out of his way to show you all of this stuff. But sometimes you just can't really see because you're so caught up in the moment. And I think Thad, you were giving a brilliant analogy about if you're looking outside, you can see like your garden, and you wouldn't see what's on the glass on your window. But if you focus on the window, you're not going to see the little specks, whatever. You're not going to see what's going on there, right? So we could focus on different things. And so the reason why I gave those stories is it could be very easily we learn a fact that would completely and totally, utterly change and wreck our worldview or our views on politics or whatever it might be, whatever position that you might have. You could learn literally one little fact, and you would completely cut off both of your legs, and you would have absolutely no like literally legs to stand on, right? So I don't believe that's the case with Christianity. Obviously, I wouldn't follow Christianity if I thought it had that big of a plot hole in it. But there's things that we could learn that we're just extremely limited from our perspective. So if we insist that we're right, that we have to have 100% knowledge, I think it just really closes us off from learning new things. And my other atheist has a brilliant concept that knowledge comes from humility. All knowledge stems from that, because you have to have the ability to say, I don't know in this particular moment, to be able to learn. Because if somebody someone who is a know-it-all will never be able to learn and to change their ideas, right? So that's the next thing I want to ask you. There's two of them that say this. Okay, so two of these, I want to read them together. It says, promise to think over your opponent's ideas and study them carefully. Your opponent may be right or partially right. You never want to hear, and I think this is so key. This is so key right here. We tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. You never want to hear those words come out of someone's mouth. So what are your thoughts? Actually, I want to hear both of you guys feedback on this. And again, I want to read this again because I think it's so important. Promise to think over your promise to overthink your opponent's ideas and study them carefully. I think that really helps to build empathy. One, your opponent may be right or partially right. You never want to hear, we tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. Spotlight on you.
Well, I would put a caveat on that for myself. I embrace the tension. Tension is nature's way of handling complexity. The biceps and the triceps, those muscles only pull in one direction, and they work together for our arms to work. And the respect for healthy tension and disagreement and light coming from the conflict, like Sid was talking about, right? All those things are how we get complexity. If you really want to be strong biceps, it doesn't do any good to destroy the triceps. You end up harming the biceps as well. It's not going to grow that way. So I'm about respectful conversation and growth. But the caveat is, if you are creating fear that outweighs the evidence, then I will choose not to have a conversation with you. And I will tell you that I consider it morally wrong what you're doing, because you're putting people into that fight or flight mode. And in that fight or flight mode, people are not their most rational self. So if you really want to have a conversation with somebody, promoting fear that is disproportionate to the evidence is not going to promote conversation. It is actually going to put a person into an unhealthy state for healthy conversation. It's going to, in fact, it looks like manipulation, and I consider it immoral because of that. Likewise, the parts of our brains that respond to disgust, if you think about, a sandwich that's got, a 4-day-old fish that hasn't been refrigerated, right, between two pieces of bread, or something that's very disgusting, right? You're going to keep a good, safe distance from that. Moral disgust is similar. If I think that, Isaiah's morally disgusting because he wears a coat on a podcast, right? Once I think that,
what you got against my coat, man? Come on, I'm trying to show up my tattoos here.
If someone conveys that image in my mind that Isaiah is morally disgusting, then I will not listen to him, right? And if you wanted to manipulate me, if Sid wanted to manipulate me to not hear the good information that Isaiah wants to share with me, the way to do that is to be morally outraged by Isaiah's jacket, and can't believe he's got this jacket. And can you believe, it's hijacking in that case, the limbic social part of our brains. So the first standard is you can't hijack the the primal reptile survival part of the brain through fear mongering, through creating fear that outweighs the evidence. You can't hijack the limbic trust social part of the brain by creating moral outrage that outweighs the evidence. If we get past those two levels, then we get to the neocortex, then we get to the complex left brain, right brain, frontal lobe, right? Then we get to conversation, then we get to healthy tension, then we can disagree and create sparks in a way that's going to be healthy and not damaging. But no, I will not agree to listen to somebody who's a fearmonger. And no, I will not agree to listen to somebody who's a moral gaslighter. I consider that immoral. And as a Christian or as a non-Christian said, you probably agree with me. No, you're just wrong, right? And I can't prove it. I can't prove that somebody that goes out and creates fear. We learn as kids growing up, the boy who cried wolf, and that that's bad. We don't do that.
Right.
But if you're trying to, if you want to make your podcast work, if you're trying to come across on a network, one way to do that, as people are flipping through the channels and they're sitting there for 1 second and flipping channels, if you decide, well, here's what we're going to do, we're going to have fear, outrage, and xenophobia as the principle of our show, so that every face that comes on there is screaming and yelling, and right, that's hijacking that part of the brain that says, oh, this person's threatened, and they're right here next to me, right? Our brains weren't evolved to know that, right? It feels like Isaiah's right here next to me, right? He's not. He's halfway across the world, but my brain's being fooled by the fact that you're sitting here on the screen right in front of me. So no, I do not do that. I will not agree to immoral behavior, to having reasonable conflict with somebody that's being immoral.
Okay, so first of all, I like my jacket. I wear the jacket to show off these tattoos and to hide the fact that I don't have muscles. Okay, first of all. Second of all, no, really, thank you. That's actually, I do wear this as kind of like a joke. It's not, I'm not taking myself too seriously in this. But, if you want to make money, if you want to get a lot of clicks, that's how you do it. It's specifically done for a reason. And I am telling you as clear as day, I'm a missionary down here in South Korea. And it's times, because of the coronavirus, has been extremely difficult for our family financially. But you couldn't pay me $1 billion to speak in that kind of language. Likely, you couldn't. There's no amount of money would I accept to do something that I believe is ultimately going to harm my daughter in the long run. So it doesn't matter if I never monetize this podcast. I have values that I am not going to compromise, no matter what kind of incentive is involved. So one, I'm not going to dehumanize atheists. The point of the Good Samaritan parable, you were talking about the prodigal son parable, which I was, but the point of the Good Samaritan parable is that, hey, sometimes it's the non-believers, sometimes it's the Muslims, sometimes it's the sheiks or the gays or the alcoholic who is encompassing and operating in a way that's more in line with the gospel and the lines of Christ. That's the whole purpose of the Good Samaritan parable. And if you don't like that truth, and you're a Christian, then you probably should find another religion, because that's your own founder saying those truths right there. So I have found that to be the case many times. I love atheists. I found many times that they operate inside of a realm of Christianity, that even if they don't call themselves a believer, that they understand biblical truths, and they understand that you Christians are not living up to what you preach. There's this amazing other analogy that Christ gave, where he says there's these two brothers, and one of them, the father, which would be God, tells them both to do something. One of them says, yeah, sure, I'll go do it. And the other one says, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, the one who says, I'm going to do it, he doesn't wind up doing it after all. And the one who says, I'm not going to do it, winds up doing it, which you could consider like an atheist, right? And he says, well, who's more justified in this story? And it's obvious that the person who's justified is the person who is behaving in a more moral manner. So it's not a matter of what you believe, it's a matter of what you actually do. So that being said, sorry for that little rant, but I want to give you the last question. Again, you can answer that one, Sid, about considering what the other person is talking about. And by the way, just one thing, agree to respectfully agree to disagree on this point, because the only person I've ever seen to take down those kind of fear mongers that you're talking about, like to take down whole chapters of the KKK and racist people, is a guy who I modeled this show after, and his name is Daryl Davis. And he had a movie called Accidental Courtesy, where he talked to a bunch of, he's a black guy. And as a result of his efforts, he literally took down entire groups of KKK members, not even trying to, by treating them like humans, by talking to them. One time he let them use his tour van so they could go out and do one of their KKK rallies, because no one wanted to rent them a bus. And as a result, he has a whole closet full of KKK robes that people who have converted have given him. And he is the absolute 100% inspiration of this podcast. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to frame this over to you. I guess in this context, you're the KKK member, Sid. So no, I love you guys.
Great. Yeah.
No, but how do we do that? How do we, how do we evaluate whether or not we can be wrong and whether or not the other person can do so? Can you give me your thoughts on that?
Sure. Just as a quick side, and just as a further back in the discussion,
Sure.
The Sixth Sense was absolutely the worst horror movie ever, and the reason is because some dead guy went to work for 13 years. Now, if that's not horror and scary, I don't know what is. So, just wanted to throw that in there. Yeah, Thad's right. I mean, not all conversations are about getting along in olive branches and that kind of thing.
My God.
Part of understanding your position, and this is what I don't like, and this is on either side of any debate, especially the ones I've had online, is that you have people there arguing and they've never thought of the opponent's argument. They've never even considered or expanded on those ideas at all, and it shows really quickly. Like, I hate when, my pet peeve, and I try not to get mad about it, but my pet peeve is when, a theist will come on and tell me, well, two, they tell me, first of all, they'll tell me I'm going to hell. And I'm like, okay, dude, you need to invent a time machine and go talk to me when I was 4, because threatening people doesn't work to adults. Okay. The second thing I don't like is that when, now, and atheists do the exact opposite of this, but theists will do this. They'll say, you don't want to believe in God because you want to sin. Okay, that kind of, to me, is now you've cut out all the things we could have talked about, and now you're focusing on threatening me. Atheists will do the exact opposite, because they'll say things to, like, they'll say things like, well, that you're coming from a position of ignorance. Now, I don't take ignorance or somebody calling me ignorant as an insult, because I understand what that word actually means. It means you lack knowledge. I'm ignorant on a ton of things. Right. And the older I get, the more ignorant I get, because we just keep knowing less and less of more and more. Right? But a lot of people will take that, you're just a believer because you're ignorant, or you don't want to learn science, or so. That's right. I mean, you get to people like that, there's no real point in having a conversation. But I think that, like I said earlier, that the biggest thing is to understand your, and I hate the word opponent, the person you're having a conversation with, understand their arguments, read up on, if somebody is opposed to you on a political idea or a social idea or a religious idea, you have to know what they're talking about. It's not good enough to know what you're talking about. You need to know what they're talking about. Nothing's poorer than a conversation where you have one guy that knows one thing and one guy that knows something else, and they know nothing of each other's differing ideas. What kind of conversation can you have with that? Like, if you mentioned to me the prodigal son or the Good Samaritan, I have to know the context of what you guys are. If I don't know those stories, how do we have a discussion about the Good Samaritan if I don't understand what you're talking about? And people always laugh at me because I read the Bible regularly. Well, why do you read the Bible? I said, well, it's Western canon literature is exclusively based off the Bible. If you can't read Shakespeare without knowing where he got, where that basis of those stories came from. So, I mean, yeah, I just, that annoys me when people get into an argument and they know nothing about what the opposition's arguments are about or discussion. Like, you have to know what your opponent's talking about. Doesn't mean you have to, and like you were saying, Isaiah, with your friend that was, and I think I know who you're talking about. I've seen an article about him. I just can't remember his name, but the fellow that was hanging around with the KKK.
Daryl Davis.
Yeah, you know, Daryl in some ways had to. Now he had to be able to, and I think it was, oh God, I'm terrible at this. George Orwell said this, is that you have to be able to hold a thought in your head without agreeing with it. You know, so I'm assuming Daryl would have to hold that thought in his head that, okay, here's where these guys are coming from. This is why they probably think what they think. And he can do all that, but not accepting that okay, they think this, they think one, they think two, that equals three. He doesn't have to accept three, but he has to know that they're thinking 1 + 2 and why they think that.
Wow.
So you got to be able to hold those thoughts in your head and not necessarily agree with them, but at least know what the people you're trying to change are talking about.
Yeah.
Let me say two things real quick. Sid, you mentioned the two things that bothered you right off the bat. Being told you're going to hell and being told that, you know, all you want to do is eat babies or whatever it is that you atheists do. And those two things are the fear mongering and moral gaslighting that I'm talking about. Right?
Yeah.
I won't have that conversation with somebody who's going that way, right? But if we, and the conversations end up being pretty interesting when we get when fear mongering, moral gaslighting aren't involved, when we're not hijacking the reptile and the limbic brain, and we're actually engaged in full brain healthy balance. That's when we can have some healthy conversation. But I will also say I have no desire to overturn anybody or, you know, ever be famous for doing anything or you know, take the KKK group down. I am, and this may sound selfish, but I am so appreciative of my spirit in this moment, here and now, and being mindful and fully present in that's my first priority, right? And my second priority is the person across from me, to encourage them to be growing and aware and mindful of their spirit in flesh in this moment. And when it comes to, you know, I don't throw scriptures around, but you know, that happens to be the greatest command in scripture, according to a guy who speaks in red letters. And you can take every other verse of scripture away and I'd be fine with it. Just give me those two verses. Loving the things of spirit, loving the things of God, mind, body, soul, strength, which happen to be the four perspectives, and loving the person across from you. So Christianity is that simple. Scripture is that simple, and the premise is that simple. And when we get away from fear mongering and moral gaslighting, we can enjoy the fullness of my spirit and your spirit and the community that happens when we're in healthy accord in that way.
Just the other thing too is that sometimes when you're discussing something or arguing with somebody, and like we haven't argued, we've obviously just been discussing things. But for instance, this podcast, it isn't just the three of us. You know, there might be other people. Well, hopefully, there's other people that are going to be watching this. If you're debating somebody in a public forum or you're online, your goal maybe has nothing to do with the person across from you of convincing them of anything. You know, it might be somebody else that's watching or reading, you know, that you might end up that you don't even know that you might be talking to. So I just wanted to add that. But no, Thad's right. I mean, you and that's the problem with social media is you run into all kinds of. Right, we got an expression in Canada called wing nuts. I don't know if you guys have that down there, but you run into all kinds of wing nuts that there's no point. As soon as they start typing or talking, it's like, okay, yeah, there's nothing interesting about that.
Right.
You know,
we have wing nuts in America. Yes, we do.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Okay. So first of all, when I use the word opponent, you got to understand that what I'm talking about is just the person you're disagreeing with, because obviously I don't see I don't see either of you two. Actually, we might disagree with something, but I would never see either of you, or Muslim or Sikh or Buddhist or anyone else. I would never see you guys as enemies. But that being said, if you take a look at Lao Tzu, The Art of War, one of the things that he puts a lot of emphasis and a lot of stress on is knowing your opponent better than they know themselves. Okay, so if you're gonna, I mean, I don't know which one of you summed it up about George Orwell. That was absolutely brilliant that you said that. 1984 is actually my favorite book of all time. Just in the interest of full disclosure, but because I think it's so relevant in so many different ways, and a lot of people just really, I believe that should be an absolute mandatory reading for everybody in school. But that being said, so if you want to have the strongest position, if I wanted to have the strongest position of Christianity, I need to know atheist points better than you do. Okay. But that being said, I'm not interested to try to argue with you into being a Christian, because I don't even think that that's possible. In my worldview, it's not possible for me to argue with you into being a Christian, because you need to have an experience with God. I was an atheist before, and I didn't come to Jesus Christ until I had a face-first collision that totally changed my life. I went to Bible college. I grew up in it as a minister's kid. I was a missionary. I was a preacher for a while. To make my parents happy. None of that changed me, and none of that brought me closer to God or Jesus Christ. It wasn't until I experienced him. So first of all, I don't think that that's possible. Okay, I don't believe I can win a debate with you and then tomorrow you're going to come to Jesus Christ. I don't believe that that's possible. Okay, I believe that you're going to either be drawn to my message partially. Maybe this is wrong or this is right, but by the way that I behave, the way that I treat you, by treating you with respect and with dignity and with compassion, that you're going to be more likely to listen to my story of restoration, of reformation, of the hurt, that I was saved from the alcoholism, the depression, the suicidal, all that stuff that was in my life before Christ. You're going to be more likely to listen to that if I'm treating you with respect and giving you the due respect of hearing exactly where you're coming from. Because I can tell you what I think you believe, and someone else can tell me what atheists believe. But until you tell me yourself what you believe, then there's no way for me to really gauge. I can't project what I think that you believe onto you. And I think that's partially what I've heard from a lot of atheists, that they've told me themselves, is that that's what they don't like about Christians. They're trying to project their morality onto them, and they're trying to say, oh, you believe that just, rape or genocide or whatever is okay. You guys are just Hitler supporters, whatever. Or you guys, as you said, eating babies. I mean, that's a pretty funny joke to say that that's literally the kind of light that the brush that you're being painted in. So I think if we take a step back and say, hey, let's talk these issues out. We don't have to agree on everything. In fact, as you said, I don't always agree with myself, man. My perspective from 10 years ago, from 5 years ago, before I was a father, has changed dramatically. So if we just take a step back, just talk through these issues, and even if we aren't going to agree on the issues, we can just say we can agree to disagree and still have respect for each other along the way. And we're all on this journey. We're all being flung into space together on this planet. So we might as well have a little bit of compassion and a little bit of empathy along the way. And that being said, if you guys could just give me your last 30 seconds, I want to thank you guys both for your time. And you guys, we're going to have to do this again. Maybe next time we'll bring in another atheist. So I said, like I was telling you, you're outnumbered here, but it's not like we're trying to team up on you, right? I think we all grew a little bit in this conversation. What do you think about that?
We've barely discussed religion at all, really. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, that hasn't really come up in this discussion. So no, and like I say, if you're a Canuck, you're kind of used to being outmanned in most things, but discussions and arguments and opponents and people you're talking to, I mean, those words get thrown around, and the problem with words is that unless you have precise definitions, different words. I mean, mm-hmm. I got a whole list of favorite fallacies people commit, and one is a false equivocation. They'll take a word meaning and then twist that meaning a bit in the course of a discussion, so that you're no longer You're no longer talking about this. You're talking across each other. Having said that, like Isaiah was saying, Thad, you generally don't change anyone's mind with one discussion. I mean, I've never seen that. I've never seen anyone say, "Oh yeah, you're completely right and I was completely wrong." And I mean, that almost I've never seen it happen.
Hey, curling is boring. Curling is not fun to watch. You need a cup.
It's annoying to play. But yeah, I've never come across a conversation or even a series of conversations. And I think a good example would be oh geez, my head's moving. Christopher Hitchens went out, they wrote a book together with a fellow that was a pastor from Idaho. Oh, and they did a whole series on YouTube where they went around debating and traveling together. Oh man, my memory's terrible. I'll have to send you the link to it, but it's a good series. They wrote a book together, and the one guy's the minister was from Moscow, Idaho, and him and Hitchens wrote a book together, and then they traveled around the country to promote the book and debate each other. And they debated 7, 8, 9 times, and I'm sure you could tell by the end of the 9th debate from the first debate that they hadn't changed each other's minds. But that wasn't their point either. There was a bit of a commercial thing where they're trying to sell a book. I understand that. But the other thing too is that they're not necessarily talking to each other in those debates. They're talking to everybody. And they're not trying to convince each other necessarily. They're just trying to influence other people. So debates on their own or discussions or those are ongoing things. And like you were saying, Isaiah, I mean, if you believed everything you believe when you're 18, and you're our age, well, how boring would that be? Run through life thinking all the same things all the same times. I think it was Mark Twain said that when he was 15, he couldn't believe how ignorant his old man was, and when he turned 21, he couldn't believe how much the guy had learned in 6 years.
Right.
So you change as you age and you experience the world. You change. You don't change everything. At the core, a lot of people are still the same type of person with morals and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's good things to have your beliefs challenged and have them change. Right? There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, thank you so much. Your last thoughts, Dad?
We'll have to cut a hole in the ice and go fishing here.
Yeah,
the 3 of us.
Maybe not Kentucky.
Come down to Kentucky and we'll go hunt some deer. That'd be good too.
There you go.
Yeah. So really, man, this is actually, I got to tell you this. This is probably the 30th podcast. We've probably had around 20 guests so far. This has definitely been the most enjoyable for me. I feel like we've made a lot of progress, and I would love to have you two back. I think we're all like moderates, and so when we're sitting as moderates and we're trying to talk, even within my own realm of politics or religion, the people who are on the extremes or people who are trying to call names, that's just not the kind of conversations I want to participate with. So we've done a lot to humanize each other and understand the other's perspective. And I think if we have a few more of these talks, we can move that the goalpost just a little bit in, and we can kick some nice. You guys, actually, speaking of moving goalposts in, I think in Canada, you guys have already moved the goalposts in, right?
In regards to
football,
theirs are further
Canadian
back, I think.
No, our fields are bigger,
Footballs.
and our field's bigger and wider, and the goalposts are further back from each other. Yeah.
Okay, so I totally messed up that analogy.
And there's only 3 downs instead of 4, so we got to get it done quicker. Yeah,
Okay,
none of this
so
running the ball into the ground all the time. You got to throw it sometimes. So
I totally killed that. But the point is that the closer we do move the goalposts in, that the more we can score. And so really appreciate you guys' time. And we look forward to seeing you back at the next episode of RG Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys. Nice to meet you,
See you
Thad.
guys.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Yeah, nice to meet you.